I couldn't believe it. It used to hurt me when people said to me when I first got to the States in 1990, "Oh, you know a lot more about American history than I do." They were giving me that as a compliment. I was nearly in tears.
Right.
Oh, you think that's something good?
Yeah.
I still get that when people read my Constitution Con article. They go, "Oh, I didn't know all of this," and how do you know it as an Irish guy?
Well,
Teach me to do as the Romans do. I'm in your country. I'm going to learn all about it, aren't I? I came here for that very purpose. You're living here all your life and you don't know these things? You don't know who Aaron Burr was? You don't know what's been going on here? You don't know that the Massachusetts Bay Company and that all your prime ministers and presidents were members of these British-run corporations? You don't know that your American flag is one step away from the flag of the British East India Company, one of the most tyrannical organizations on the face of the earth? If you blink quickly, you might think they're the same flag, and then you're giving me all this stuff about independence and freedom?
Sure. Yeah.
And in American high schools, I know this because I went to one, they, for a while, they actually go into this huge palaver about how long it took the various founding fathers to come up with the seals and the arguments that went back and forth and the designs that were thrown away and the time it took to come up with what seals they were going to use and what kind of insignias, and should we use an eagle or should we use a phoenix, and should we use this and should we use that? And they go to the great lengths to show you what difficulty was involved in coming up with these tutelary symbols of America, but forget to mention that at the end of the whole process, your flag just happens to be a simulacra of the British East India Company flag.
Right.
Something doesn't add up here. With all that effort of the Benjamin Franklins and the George Washingtons and the whoever else, at the end of the day, you come up with a Judaic, and I don't mean Jewish, I mean Judaic eagle with these stars and stripes, which is, it's unbelievable when you get into what that's about. And then the actual national flag is the flag that's almost identical in shape, 3/4 identical to the East India a British corporation. And more than that, the folding of the flag, the rituals and the insignias and the military accoutrements and the symbolism and the heraldry is all straight out of either Judaic. Again, I emphasize I'm not talking Judaism as people understand it.
Of course.
This is very different. Or British Israelite, British Zionist, British Fabian, etc. symbolism. Solar symbolism, if you will. Well, it's a secret society term. Okay. We use the word Jewish to refer to people of a religion. And they do themselves. They use these terms for themselves. The term, and this is a word play, very similar to what we were talking about earlier, about how words have been misconstrued and misinterpreted. Secret societies know that behind the lodge door, there is no such thing as religious difference or political divide. This is all made for TV.
Right.
When you understand that, then what I say next makes sense. Because I always define, when I get a question like that, I always say that the Pope of Rome can be a Judite, even though he heads the Catholic religion, or apparently heads the Catholic religion. Whereas the Queen of England is also a Judite, even though she heads the Protestant religion. And it's because, and even there's an Islamic version and what have you, the Seveners, the Frankists. All of these people know fine rightly what that term really means. It goes back to a very, very powerful secret society called the Gaionum. That's why you have a capital G in Masonry in the middle of the compass and rule. The G does not stand for God, goddess, geometry, or any of that nonsense. It stands for Gaionum, which is a super secret steering committee that's many thousands of years old, that was started by the descendants of the pharaoh Akhenaten. This is what I go into in the Irish Origins DVD and book.
Right.
Another word for Gaionum is Aton, Atonists. That's just because their god was Aton. They have other names for their god, of course.
And is it correct that we get the letter A from this and different...
Not from it. No, the A was a word that was from, in Egypt, it was symbolized by the eagle, Ahom. But the symbol of the eagle is being used for its solar principles, and partly because it comes from the tribe of Manasseh. When you realize that when they talk about the 12 tribes of Israel, you're actually talking about the 12 tribes of Aton, the 12 tribes of the Gaionum. You're talking about its secret society language. It's like a code that the military is given. Say that in military code, you have the code, somebody sends you a map, but unless you can overlay the sort of a key over that map, you won't know where the maneuvers are. So when we all use these languages in normal daily life, we're missing the secret society filter. When you know what secret societies are about and study them, then you have the key that now makes you decipher the map better. And then these words and terms start to take on their true meaning, you see, and the regalia that these people use, all the architecture that you see in America, the various phrases that the politicians use, and so on, starts to now make true esoteric sense.
Right.
What they want to do is divert you. There's been a campaign to divert you so that you think that when you're saying words like atheism, or when you're talking about Judaism, you're speaking in purely terms of the religion, which has almost next to no connection at all to any of this stuff. The Gaionim, I was going to say, would be more well known to people if I was to use the word Sadducee. Religious people would understand that there was the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And the Pharisees are well known as being the lawgivers and the priest class that ran Jerusalem, you see, and had problems with Jesus and what have you. They were featured in the Bible. And their rival group was known as the Sadducees, who were multimillionaires. They were the elite. They were the rich elite aristocracy of Judea at the time. Not just of Judea, by the way. That's partly another lie. But the Sadducees, to cut a long story short, the Pharisees on paper were very much against the Roman presence. They were against any conquering force, whether it be Greek or whether it be Roman during the biblical times. Whereas the Sadducees had always been in deep business relationships and also ideological, religious, spiritual relationships with these so-called conquerors. Because again, it's easy to change the word invader to the word visitor, and all of these terms have again been misconstrued. The Romans were not just a military force there to conquer in the way that history books show, in this sort of cartoon Hollywood way.
Right.
These interactions between these lands had been going on amicably for many, many hundreds of years, and the business relationships and the powerful dynastic concerns had been as old as the 18th dynasty in Egypt. And one of these movements, one of these groups, the Sadducees, were well in with the elite patrician families of Greece and Rome and many other more elusive dynasties, and they were the intellectuals. And it's basically from them. It's basically they are the ones who kept the tradition of the true Athenism, the pure Athenism, whereas the Pharisees were the ones who basically created the law, the Torah, the laws that we know today, the Bible as we see it today, even though it's largely still an Atheist ideology. It's contaminated by the more familiar Pharisaic traditions, which are more well known. What I mean is that in history, the Pharisee existence is ostensibly continued, whereas the Sadducees in history are meant to just drop off the map. They just suddenly completely disappear. This is something I can't understand why people haven't noticed this. The Sadducees apparently just completely disappear from history. One minute they're there, and the next minute they're not. And most scholars pay them no mind at all. But when you've done your homework, you find out that these Sadducees, as well as some very elite Pharisees, actually go back to an ancient order called the Order of Melchizedek, or the Sons of Zadok. And then you discover, as I've done, that through that you find that this Melchizedek is nothing more than a stand-in, if you will, in exactly the same way that Moses was a stand-in for Akhenaten. There was no Melchizedek, there was no Moses. These are scripted simulacras. These are sort of actors. They're just actors. They're just purely fictional renderings of the lost Akhenaten, who has not been addressed directly, but is his lineage that has continued down and animates all of these secret societies. So Rosicrucianism, Templarism, the Priory de Zion, the Masons, and a lot of other groups that you can think of, especially these powerful alpha lodges in England that the royal family members belong to, like the Order of the Knights of Garter, the Order of St. John, the Order of St. Michael and St. John, the Knights of Malta over in Rome, the Knights of Rhodes. All of these groups are purely Athenist, and they come down, the so-called Jewish or Judaic elements are coming from these elite Sadducees and their schools, and the Gaionim, which is again an extremely elite group that thought all of this up. They were the ones who had to keep the knowledge of Egypt, the knowledge that had to be thrown out when Akhenaten got thrown out. They preserved it, they kept it, and they're the ones who came up with what we now know as the New World Order. And the symbols that you find in America that are on the dollar bill, they're their symbols. So when certain scholars come along and say, look, there's some Jewish symbols, look, there's a Jewish Star of David, I know they mean well, and I know they're trying their best, and they're getting a handle on this, but they're going to end up in a cul-de-sac, because that's a cul-de-sac that's been designed for you to go down. They want you to just be bashing Jews. They just want you to be getting into all this conflict,
sure, so
that you don't see the hidden hand.
It's the MO.
What's that?
It's the excuse me. It's the MO. It's divide and conquer. It's divisionary. You get
and
everyone
that's why when you look
other.
at these pictures in history and you see that insider smile on Winston Churchill's lips, or that insider smile on the Pope, or on the Queen of England, or on Brzezinski, or whoever, now you know what that insider smile is all about. They can barely contain their glee, their happiness, their joy, that all you people are running around like headless chickens waving flags and butchering and murdering each other for things that are utterly preposterous. Zionism is created by the British Fabians, the British aristocracy. Socialism as we know it throughout the world, not only the socialism that was involved in Russia, but the socialism that is now ubiquitous in America, is also created by British aristocrats. How does that work? How can people who are the richest people in the world be espousing so-called socialist ideology? You understand it when you realize that, again, behind the lodge door, none of these divisions matter at all. They have, with one hand, they've got to preserve their existence so that they're not threatened, so that the working class doesn't actually completely overthrow them. That's a fear. Another part of it is just a simple game that they just love to do. And two, the smallest coterie at the very top, remember that removed part of the pyramid at the top, that small group at the top has the bigger and larger agenda of massive world control, massive mind control. They're the smartest ones at the top. The rest of them have not got a full picture of this and are themselves dispensable, as we know. Yes. Generals, popes, even certain prime ministers, and in many cases even royal figures when they step out of line. They are instantly disposable on the greater geopolitical game. And this goes for political parties down where we are. It's a laugh. It's a joke, the way this shenanigans goes on and the way the Bill O'Reillys animate it constantly and the Russ Limbaughs and the whole circus on the lower level we observe. You're never going to work it out from looking at that. That is the end manifestation of an incredibly elaborate occult game of geopolitics and mind control that's been going on for centuries of time. Mm-hmm. And just to again summarize, so that when we see these terms being used, Catholic, Protestant, Islamic, Jewish, these are made for order. They don't even have any longevity. The word Jew, I think the word Jew itself in that spelling is only going back to like the 1800s or something like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Before that, it was known to be Judite, Judaic, and so forth and so on.
Yeah, we have like what the Anti-Defamation League. And,
yeah.
All these different, they've lambasted David Icke up in Canada.
And they're funded by British aristocracy. The ADL and most of these Canadian versions of ADL, the B'nai B'rith, they're not endorsed by most Jews, by the way.
Right.
They're an extreme right-wing group that has its direct funding from the dukes and princes of Britain, as many of your presidents have done from the very, very beginning. The only thing is that they were expert in rhetoric, that's all. They just knew the sophistry. Benjamin Franklin was a British agent. Adolf Hitler was a British agent. These people just knew how to construe the language to give you talismanic terms so that you imagine that you're democratic, that you're free. You actually don't even know what these words mean. You haven't even worked it out yourself. You don't know what context it's in. This is why we're in such a mess today with the legal profession. Right. Why the legal profession has so much power over us is because we don't even know the meaning of the word citizen or the meaning of the word state, or where these words came from, you see, and justice and all of these kinds of terms. Now, I'm glad to see that so many people are getting savvy to this, and that is an incredibly important thing. In fact, even when we were just talking there about the difference between Judaism and the tribes of Israel, the truth about that subject, because I've been studying it since 1980, and I had so many, blank spots. Huh. It's only been in the last 10, 15 years that the true information has come out. So we're in very recent times. That's why I'm usually an optimist, is because it's only in the recent times that we've even had access to the information that fits these missing pieces in. Yeah. Even back in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have it.
Yeah. What was it, 100 years ago or 200 years ago, even people couldn't even read the Bible. They were just dictated,
That's right. And before that, there was even few books, and literacy was down to a minimum. And even the books that you read were tightly controlled. Yeah. You were simply not, and even today, some of the greatest libraries in the world, we know this about the Vatican Library and other secret society libraries that are in Brussels and Belgium and Berlin and where have you. You have to be a member of a secret society to get in to read those books and see them, and then you're limited for time. How much can a man do? But my work specializes on those who have done that work. I'm like a liaison between the great scholars that I refer to throughout my websites and my work, to hopefully give people the backup information that will save them the 30, 40 years of not wasted research, but time. The time is of the essence now. Yeah. So I try to synthesize that. I do it on my websites to present these works of these great men that the world has completely forgotten about, so that while you're watching Dr. Phil, there's the graves of great men are being unattended, who had the deepest wisdom that is absolutely essential, not only to generate that thought again, to stimulate that muscle again. It's like they always say, if you don't stimulate a muscle, it becomes atrophied.
Right.
Well, the very muscles of thinking, the very muscle of thinking is ready to be completely and irreversibly atrophied. It's not just like, okay, we had, in previous centuries, people were a bit, lackadaisical when it came to reading. We're way, 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 way beyond that. The new generation will not think, Jason.
Okay. Yeah, they want to end it forever.
Yep. And they're already doing it. They're already very, very close to that right now. If people go to, for instance, to my articles, michaeltsarion.com, go through to the article section, on the article Weapons of Mass Destruction Found, and on the conspiracy, on the Constitution Con article, right, there's two articles there, you'll see the quotes from leading governors, presidents, and presidential advisors, what have you, totally sycophantically adoring, worshipping, drooling over the royal families. Joe Kennedy, for instance, was obsessed by having at least one of his sons. He had 6 sons, I think, and 1 daughter. Was obsessed by, he was an Anglophile. He was a well-known Anglophile. Read any biography of Joe Kennedy, and you'll find that he was obsessed with England, with the British aristocracy, with the royal family.
Right.
And was absolutely obsessed by getting at least one of his children married into British aristocracy, and he actually did it. His daughter is the one who actually went over and married some extremely senior duke. I never can remember who it is. She did that, and he brought up all the rest of his sons to adore Britain, and therefore basically that amounted to having America sold out, because them and like so many others, that was their idea, to not only get into deep business relationships with British companies, because that would lead, of course, then to knighthoods and awards. And we now know that even people in the Federal Reserve and other members of the Bush and Clinton and Reagan administration have gone and taken awards, Norman Schwarzkopf and so many others I could mention. They've all gone this route. This became a pattern, from the time of Roosevelt, that go and kowtow and try to become on the board of governors, try to have deep business relationships with these British companies, so that might lead to governorships and all sorts of appointments. And then finally, if you're very lucky, it might even get you knighted and what have you. You see, so this has been a going concern. Now, this should raise a red flag to any American right away, and these people should be totally thrown out of office and arrested.
When you pointed out, like to me, when I saw what you were pointing out with George Bush, on one knee to the Queen of England,
yeah,
I said, wow. And you also pointed out that, we've become so damn amnesiac that we've forgotten who our original enemies were.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, this is
George
absolutely
III.
right.
That's right. George III swore eternal war on the Americans for what they did during the War of Independence. Eternal war.
Right.
Now, a king's word is the command to his lieutenants. And therefore, does that not explain why there is no freedom anymore here? Why the federal government have their tentacles everywhere? Why communitarianism is rampant in this country? Why outsourcing is rampant? All the things that you're seeing did not just happen by accident or happenstance or the greed of corporations, like some lower level types of PBS level commentators are probably going to tell you. That is false and can be proven to be false. And you find it turning up in a lot of books where they're so tame, they're so lame, they're so weak-willed and so gullible or misinformed or duplicitous that they simply will not face the facts.
Right.
You have so many politicians who go sort of halfway and just say, like the sort of the Ralph Nader types, the sort of Ron Paul types, they'll go to a certain level by saying, it's just, if we could just get rid of the greedy corporations.
Yeah.
You mean to tell me that that's it? That's the reason? Absolutely false.
Yeah.
Absolutely false.
It's absolute rubbish, in my opinion.
Of course it is. That is what they've done. Is that, I agree with them to one point where I would say, yes, of course, the elite I'm talking about does operate through these corporations. That I'll give you. But they have created a corporate front, a corporate mask, so that the mug in the street will literally think it is only greedy such and suches who are doing this. The George Soros, parasite who's or the Greenspan cockroach.
Yeah. That's
true to a point. That's true to a point. But my God, a man who only sees that, who's still myopic enough to believe in that political, it's very comfortable, just get rid of the greedy capitalists. When we hear people on the floor of the Senate, well-meaning as they are, rail on about the horrible economic disaster that's taking place, and if only we could get these greedy men to have a conscience, sorry, that's fine and dandy, and that's all right for what it is, but it's scripted. It's made to order because they want the vast majority of Americans, especially in a period of meltdown, who may be asking questions. We want to give you a pseudo-answer. And we want to make sure that that answer leads you away from the real answer. All politicians, almost all of them, their job is to lead you away from the true oracle of truth. But to do that, they must give you a simulacra of truth, a chimera of truth, so that you'll think, yeah, there's a lot of truth to this. Hey, I went and checked that out. This really is the case. And every so often, you'll have this revelations taking place on the internet or in the public media about some greedy corporation that's just been uncovered in Europe, and some other greedy type of George Soros type who's been sucking off the blood or whatever. And we rush down there thinking, great, we've discovered the source of all of these problems, And they don't even mind at certain periods of history even sacrificing some of their own gang if they need to, sacrifice somebody. I mean, on a chessboard game, you have the sacrifice of the king.
Sure, collateral damage.
Yeah, collateral damage. So if a couple of Rothschilds have to be taken out, or there's a pogrom now and again, hey, that's just good entertainment, whatever, we can handle it. We'll get a lot of other things done while that's taking place as well.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's just same thing. You're going to go in, you're going to take out all these oligarchies, you're going to, get rid of the, the New World Order, but it's just like we're doing exactly the same process as we did to begin with.
Over and over again.
We started it this way,
Don't go to the nucleus. And as I said, the nucleus is partly a psychological type of undertaking. Very much like what you see in movies of sophistication, like The Matrix and many others I could mention. They are alluding to that to a certain degree. But I will go much further than that. I will say that unless consciousness is brought into the picture, unless certain amounts of psychology and philosophy are involved in this, there is not a hope in hell that you're going to unplug that nonsense. Because unfortunately, this serpent is so clever that it's plugged into you. You are part of its activity. It's so occult. It's so subtle. It's so truly Luciferian that your very energy of life, the energy that you expatiate through emotion, through stress, through anxiety, through action even, it feeds on. It's an amazing thing when you start discovering it. It's not just out there over the hill, those guys. That's what they want you to think, because at the very most, all you'll ever be able to do is create one little faction, one little coterie, and then you've just put a target on your back. Now they know where to come and get you. Then they remove the leader of that particular action group, and the rest of them just fall apart.
Yeah. What do you think about this WikiLeaks guy? They're posting all over the place. Every news channel, Rush Limbaugh, talking about they need to create a terrorist cell out of them.
It's the same thing. It's more dust. It's 70-30. It's more chaos on top of more chaos.
Yeah.
It may give you a certain amount of truth, but it's mostly designed to lead you away from even greater things that are being done in politics today.
This is my suspicion too. It's poppycock. It's in your face, and then they can say, oh, look at these. We got to do something about this. We need to, take away the ability for us to communicate on the internet and whatnot. And they'll use it as a catalyst too, as well.
Well, it would help people to understand that, first of all, we've never been in a state of peace on this planet for probably hundreds, if not thousands of years. Politics is war.
Right.
So when the legions of St. George were, not St. George, but King George, when the legions of the British realized that they couldn't hold America for want of arms, they got an empire, remember. Any troops they send over here, they're going to weaken the empire back in Europe. And they have lots of people who are fed up with them. They're controlling Europe too. So they obviously realized that, look, it's not going to work through force of arms. And by the way, these Americans are a tough nut to crack. They're mostly Scots-Irish, and they kick our ass. They hate us with a passion. So it's not going to work. But of course, you have the extreme, hard-assed general military types who think that everything can be solved by just killing and war. So they had to go through their little process. It couldn't be stopped. And therefore you had the war.
Right.
But the higher intelligence in the alpha lodges of Freemasonry, and these, as I say, Judaic enclaves, and the Knights of the Garter, and the members of the Privy Council. People can look online and find out these things. I've got links to them galore on my websites. The Privy Council, the Order of St. George and St. Michael. All of these people were saying that's not going to work. You don't hold down an entire continent hundreds of times bigger than your country. The whole of Ireland fits inside Lake Michigan, for God's sake. England isn't much better. You cannot do it through force of arms. They're mad to even try, but let them do it, because, you know, that creating that skirmish and creating that poverty and creating that chaos, yeah, we're all for it. Doesn't matter. But don't ever think for a moment that that's how we're going to colonize that country.
Right.
They already set the work to say we're going to do it economically through the Hudson Bay Company, Virginia Company, Massachusetts Bay Company. They're also in rivalry against the Spanish, who had come a lot earlier than the Puritans and were well in North America. So they had competition. They had competition from Russia, not Soviet Russia, but the original Russia.
Yeah.
So they knew that they had to work economically. Put your men in, put your henchmen in, create this federal system. Then that federal system will spread out and occupy the states. Until now you have what is a completely federal lockdown system. There's no such thing as state-controlled power in this country anymore. That didn't happen overnight. It's a lengthy process. And since there were a certain amount of intelligent people here, like the Thomas Paines and the Edmund Burkes and a lot of very intelligent men who were looking at this and maybe would have spotted it. And there was people like Jefferson and others who did spot that something was going wrong. You have to pacify that kind of intellectual mind with a lot of talismanic documents, which we know as the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and so on. You've got to give them the illusion that it's going to be free and non-oligarchic and so on. But they left the door open in the ways that I've described in my work. They've left the door open for this same royalistic power to take over.
On the surface, they've locked the front door with a cage and a metal grate and padlocks, but the back door is left wide open.
That's exactly what they did. And that always works. That's worked throughout history.
Right.
And it's no different here. So the Russell Trust, the British East India Company, or the Dutch East India Company, BP, I mean, you name it. Most of the corporations that you know today are in some way connected to this royal force. And then what you do is you also then professionally or physically assassinate anyone who might have a snifter of the truth, which I do believe included people like Lincoln and a few others. You've got to get rid of them. If they should ever get a snifter of the truth and start to have, and not only that, but they have power too. It's not anybody can have a snifter of the truth. They're not worried about them. They're worried about if you also have the command of people, of an army or any kind of political clout. That's when they get worried and they will move to take you out.
When people start listening, in other words.
Exactly, and that's when they bring out their champions, the Louis Farrakhan's, the Ron Pauls, the Bill O'Reillys. They have a whole other battalion of just ape-like creatures who just go out there to point fingers and throw accusations. So whenever the truth is coming, or wherever you might start to get a glimmer of it, they immediately unleash the robots. All paid for them. Now, on the surface, they look like they're members of different orders, different powers, different political affiliations, left wing, right wing. The whole full rivalry ensues, you see, and we get lost in that. Our inspiration is taken up on one side, and we have false allegiance. We think, oh, this is really going to work, and we know who our enemy is supposedly, and unfortunately, the masses of mankind have been able to be completely stymied by this. And so if people listening to us only get one single fact, one area of study that they should go, and it is to study this divide and rule policy, because that will open the door to a lot of other things. Right. But never forget, they control the institutions. They control the government. They control the schools and colleges. They control the medical, the big pharma, and they control from higher up the media, so that it's very unlikely. And therefore, that's why it comes back to like we were saying at the beginning of our show, where stop waiting for everybody else to get onto this. It's going to be something that you have to do individually. And the moment that you realize that, whether you know it or not, it's like I said at the Bath conference, now it's become holy work as a matter of fact. The very moment that you might have to do something on your own, in my estimation, constitutes a sacred act. Not the sacred act as you might be thinking in a church or a mosque or a synagogue. No. The real thing, the real esoteric awakening is now taking place in your life. And there will come an enormous cost for that. And when you say that I'm willing to pay that cost, that's the moment that you become truly independent.
Yes. In other words, do what you will to me. You're not gonna shut me up. You're not gonna stamp me down. You're not gonna step on my face.
That's right. Because you've fallen in love with knowledge. You've fallen in love with the fact that knowledge is worth the price. Like Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. You know, the greatest ignorance, the greatest evil is ignorance, the greatest good knowledge. They've all said it. Well, we're at a time right now moving towards, we're in an age right now in which that is going to be very, very tested. People are now being literally tested on an individual basis. It's based on what's happening in astrologically and so on. And if you say something's based astrologically, what you really mean is it's psychological.
Right.
Because the stars, the so-called stars, is only one way of mapping what's going on in this collective psyche of people.
Right.
And so that's what's happening now. People are being separated, the sheep from the goats. That's why you have the rise of, say, somebody like Michael Tsarion and David Icke. We're not just here by happenstance either.
Right.
Our work is very much part of a movement we're not in control of. It's ordained by something far higher.
I remember once you had said, and I never really took astrology seriously until I actually heard you say this. It was that even the life at the bottom of the ocean follows the lunar cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that? You know, if the moon has this effect, why not the systems and the planets?
Yeah, I've looked into that so deeply. The whole underlying principles behind any of these things, like astrology or divination for that matter, it basically boils down to a simple question of what are the connections between mind and matter.
Yeah.
And boy, that's the endless subject, really. That is where you really gain the great insights.
Oh, yes.
When you start, first you have to ask, in other words, it's like the old statement, before you can have the answer, you must know how to ask the right question. One of the right questions to be asking in this life, there are more important ones like, what am I doing here and where am I going? But secondary to that is the question of what are the actual intimate connections between the mind, the so-called mental energy, as Wilhelm Reich would have called it bioenergetic energy,
right,
and physical energy. And this opens the door not only to a proof of astrology, but a proof of many other things like relationships and all sorts of other dynamics that go on in this world.
Well, as a human race, we've been on to this, haven't we? We have the whole philosophy of qi coming out of China and metaphysical practices of exercise just to even manifest that, physically.
Good. Oh yeah, and they were adamant about whether or not there is a duality. They have that yin-yang symbol, which is probably called the Tai Chi symbol.
It's a Taoist symbol, yeah.
The Taoist symbol, yeah, and you see these two movements, the black and the white. Isn't it amazing that there's always an opposite to something? And then don't forget that the line, the sort of curvy line that runs between those two black and white fish-like symbols, that line matters as well. That is a third part of the line of this symbol. And then you might even say that the circle, the line of the circle that encloses it, we forget that symbol is always in a circle. That circle itself is yet a fourth part now.
Oh, yeah.
So when people look at it, they think, oh, there's a duality, black and white. Hey, isn't that interesting? Yeah, but the line that divides them is the third, and the circle that encases them is the fourth. So there's actually four things you're looking at. There's four phenomena to reality, four phenomena to your psyche, four phenomena to the bedrock of the universe. You see, so one thing, again, leads to the other. They're trying to, through symbolism, teach you something.
My Tai Chi instructor told me, if you're looking at the symbol of yin-yang and you see black and white, you're really missing the point.
That's a good point. I've been learning that myself. I think there's a lot of truth to this. And don't forget that the Taoist people even have a triad. They have a sort of a three-legged symbol, very similar to the Irish Triskelion,
They have the three wise men of Taoism.
I didn't know that. Is that right?
Yeah. Those three guys.
Three wise men of Taoism.
And they were also always represented with the moon behind their head, much like we see in contemporary Christian artwork with the solar symbolism. Very amazing stuff, just so. If you look at it and then look at that, you'll go, oh, right away, you'll see it. You know what I mean? It's like, how is it just so in your face right there?
We have the three pillars of the Kabbalistic tree of life, comes to mind.
We always see this tripart sort of thinking, right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm fascinated with this. I've been looking into it. This is interesting what you're saying here. It's very interesting. Because what appears to be a duality often is not. It's a matter of you're the perceiver, so you're the third thing.
Right.
The perceiver who's seeing the duality is a third thing, which automatically negates duality. So it's a very interesting line of inquiry, that is.
Yeah, I've been into this for quite a while, trying to, who is the I who's observing the notion of I?
Right. Yeah, and then the I is split into, like when you hear your mind, you have this internal dialogue. There's a listener and a speaker.
Right.
You hear your thoughts as a series of words or a series of comments that you think is your voice. You've learned to think of it as your voice. And there's also another part of you listening to this internal voice. So there's actually two people inside your head, or two of you, a listener and a speaker. I've always thought that that's remarkable.
Yes.
So right away, the so-called I is almost a syzygy. Just as in the same way you might be talking to somebody else, you know. Shall I go to dinner tonight, or shall I watch that TV program? Yeah, okay, go ahead and watch it. There's a sort of internal dialogue. We all know there's an internal dialogue. We've never actually thought about the fact that, wait a minute, who's the speaker and who's the listener?
Yeah. And I've also thought about, how did this occur in the first place? You don't see the animals doing that, you know?
No. They have logic. They operate through what might be called a logical actions. Like you kick a dog once, it's certainly not going to come near you again. That's logical.
Sure.
Right? It knows when to come in and go, and the food will be out, but it's not rational. Like man is rational. For some strange reason, whether it's good or bad, we can argue, is man has the ability to question his own existence. Now that is, of course, different philosophers have their different take on what to do with that and why we even ask it and where it will lead. Well, that's where all the schools now differ, or the whole world of religious and philosophical schools appear, because everyone has their own particular take on that. Some schools say there's no such thing as the I, it's all an illusion. Others go, no, it's the I is the center, the self is the most important part of you, don't ever negate it. And then you have all the people in between.
Right. Yeah. It's such a fascinating study to me, you know, the whole idea of consciousness. And how did this occur, this origin of evil, as you put it so eloquently in that talk? What is the origin of evil? What is this, you know, pointing out evil and good? Where does it come from? How do we even get there in the first place?
Well, I stick to that. I have never seen anything yet. That was years ago, and I wrote that in the Atlantis book, and I've never seen one thing to shake my understanding of that. In fact, if anything, it's got stronger and stronger and stronger. I'd not say it's the only reason for the birth of the ego, but it certainly is one of the major contributing factors, I do believe to this day, was physical. Physical trauma, physiological trauma brought on by catastrophe. People can say, well, I know Tsarion thinks that catastrophe was man-made. Yeah, well, even if you don't go that far, even if you don't believe that the catastrophes that are all written in mythology was brought on by what I say it was, which was wars of the gods,
right,
it wouldn't matter. The very fact is that any and all catastrophes, be they completely natural and random, cosmological, like with comets or whatever, the fact is that catastrophe changed consciousness. You're not just sitting in an armchair passively when the whole world is erupting around you and pole shifts are taking place. So why has nobody ever asked in a deep way what that might have done to consciousness? And those who have asked it, they're not very successful at coming up with really good answers. The only one that's really close is Julian Jaynes, the author of the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, where he claims that he alludes to the fact that there was a trauma that created a kind of psychosis. He's kind of a little bit shady on what caused it. For me, there's no doubt about it. It was enormous earth cataclysms, as pointed out by umpteen scholars, including Immanuel Velikovsky and others, Commons Beaumont. Okay, so then I say, all right, given that happened, given that consciousness was traumatized, what would have happened? This is where everybody goes blank.
Sure.
For me, it's a clear understanding that the ego that we know today, with all of its fears, phobias, anxieties, schizoid proclivities, its weird tendencies, its fallibility, the fact that it even is very vulnerable, that it has certain physiological and psychological fears. To me, the ego as we know it is the product. It's not consciousness as it was before the cataclysm, but it's a consciousness that we have inherited after the cataclysm.
Yeah.
And then that ego, being very small, very fragmentary, and very fragile, itself has to create enormous defenses even just to protect its own suzerainty, to protect its own identity. And those defenses are well known to psychologists. Those defenses are what is almost a hallmark of ego identity.
Right.
But as we know, the trouble is, as we know, any wall you build to keep something out eventually keeps you in. It's that yin-yang again. So it did something that it needed to do. You can't blame the ego for doing it. It wouldn't be in existence. No form of consciousness. We'd be back to the level of the animal. There would be no consciousness to speak of unless the ego did do that, had these incredible defenses against the titanic forces, not only physical but internal. But unfortunately, it built them so strong that it became the man in the iron mask. It became the prisoner in the mask.
Wow.
And left itself open to yet another kind of undoing another kind of toxicity, the toxicity of extreme conservatism, the disease of absolute imprisonment within its own creation, you see? And that creates a madness of its own. So the kind of madness that we know today, anxieties, what do you call it, schizophrenia, neurosis, whatever, those erupted, their roots are in the catastrophe, there's no doubt about that. But there's a secondary kind of neurosis that arose within the mind itself, the ego itself, just because it's imprisoned within its own wall. It's like a prisoner who's never let out of his cell, or an animal that's continually caged there. The cage protects it, yes, but it's going stir-crazy. You see?
Yeah.
So the ego, this is the way I look at it, that the ego has become stir-crazy, and now new pathologies are developing, new levels of apprehensiveness, higher rates of sociopathy, higher rates of depression as we go. And it's because the ego defenses are so strong, you see. So there's a whole study of the anatomy of consciousness based on the idea that there was a catastrophe, that man has suffered fallout from it, that the thinking of man is deranged, and then another separate analysis of the ego itself just by the very fact that it created these defenses.